The thing that I fell in love with this sector was really, really boring. It was the realization as an investor that the satellite industry was on the cusp of really dramatic change, innovation-driven change that was going to enable a generation of vastly better businesses. And so I have come at this not so much with stars in my eyes, but with a view that we can build incredible companies and vastly more profitable and successful businesses than have existed in the sector historically.
Critical to investors are topics like innovation and growth. Critical to our society is the advancement of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, what we all know as STEM. And what is now commonly referred to as the new space industry encapsulates all of this, while perhaps also capturing some of our childhood wonder about the stars and our galaxy. And that's what makes it such a unique and different topic.
Access to launch has transformed this sector first and foremost. And it's very fashionable to think of this as the emergence of new launch platforms like SpaceX, like Rocket Lab, like those who will come behind them. But the reality is that the secondary launch market and the rideshare market has actually been much more important in this regard. And for new companies to be able to buy a cheap ticket to an orbit that they wanted enabled them to begin to rethink the creation of a space-based capability, and then to think about distributing that capability into unique satellite assets.
BlackSky has built the first of its kind platform that now achieves reliable and dynamic hourly monitoring from space. And this is really the first time this capability has entered the market and is at the forefront of a significant change in how we use space to understand our world. And maybe I can put that in perspective. For those of you that have seen satellite imagery on Google Maps, it's static. It may be a day old, it might be 6 months or 2 years old. We've now achieved the ability to dynamically monitor the most important strategic and economic locations and assets in the world on an hourly basis. And we do that on demand through an AI-enabled software platform. And really, where the world is changing is moving from kind of static types of imagery into dynamic. And that is really being driven, the demand for that is being driven by a number of very large secular trends that are happening in the market today. Obviously, conflict and national security, as such as we're seeing in the Ukraine, is driving a significant need for this worldwide, both through the US government and international government types of customers. Global supply chain intelligence, where we have fragile supply chains that need to be monitored, and where businesses and organizations need to be alerted at potential disruptions and the economic impact. Natural disasters and climate change are driving a 4x increase in billion-dollar type of catastrophic weather events that need to be monitored and recovered. And then finally, IoT technology, which is driving high demand for high-frequency location intelligence across several industries. What's game-changing here is our capabilities enabled through a software interface for all those organizations to do this themselves and have that available on demand. So whereas before, you needed to have very sophisticated software, really expensive, and it might take days to get the type of intelligence that we're delivering in a matter of hours. On the commercial front, because of the economics of our constellation, we've lowered the cost of entry to utilize this type of capability with an order of magnitude lower data costs with a on-demand user experience through our software.
At Spire, we are focused on the future of planet Earth, leveraging data and analytics from space to create a more equitable, profitable, and sustainable future for all. And we do that leveraging our fully deployed and software-defined satellite constellation, designed, operated, and launched through us. It is the fourth largest constellation on the planet, the largest one using radio waves to observe of what is happening on or above Earth. And so from the simple question of where is my stuff to the more interesting question of where is that Russian oligarch's yacht so that we can impound it, Spire data is used by customers, right? The port of Rotterdam is on this massive digitalization trend, something that we've seen in multiple industries. And they came to us with, okay, we really need to be more efficient to drive our throughput, but we also want to reduce the carbon footprint through our operations. And that's like an area where the data of Spire has made a massive impact for them. You've also seen a greater awareness of the impact that weather has on operations. And so today, about half of the world's GDP, substantially more than 1 billion people, benefit from more accurate weather prediction, and because of the data that Spire collects and delivers to government institutions. You have impact on understanding global food supplies. You have customers that leverage our data to be more accurate in how much energy they will deliver into a grid. And of course, you have national security organizations which want to know where is someone either amassing a certain aggressive capability or jamming some of the most crucial pieces of infrastructure like the global positioning system, where Spire's capability can literally pinpoint where this is happening, independent of you actually having access to this country like Syria, Ukraine, or China. And so this global transparency that we can bring to the table and that Brian brings to the table really makes a massive difference and has not been possible until just a few years ago.
We've really carved out the dynamic monitoring and the delivery of intelligence as where we fit into the market, and others are more in the static mapping side of the market, and those are two completely different applications. Some of these things in and of themselves are difficult businesses standalone, but when partnered and combined with other data, deliver a lot of value. And so I think we're going to be seeing an era of those types of capabilities being brought into companies, or strong partnerships that are going to come together to drive more value to the end customers that are just beginning to understand what they can do with all of this.
If you think of the transportation industry, there are things like planes and ships and trucks and maybe trains, and they have a lot of similarities. They got engines and they got passengers and windows and pilots and wheels, but it's reasonably obvious of how they are different. And that is not entirely true in the satellite industry at this point in time, because unfortunately we call everything a satellite. And Brian talked earlier about those base technologies. And we have the same thing there in the sense of what I call looking satellites, talking satellites, and listening satellites. Looking satellites, of course, are those that use cameras to capture the reflection of sunlight from Earth. Talking satellites are satellites that provide some form of transportation of data from one space on Earth to another via space. And then listening satellites use radio waves to observe what is happening on or above Earth. And I think it's important to understand that those categories are, as McKinsey would call it, as mutually exclusive and totally exhaustive as planes, ships, and trucks, meaning that they provide very, very distinct capabilities where there might be, and in certain instances definitely is, collaboration across those categories. but there isn't actually any competition across those categories. There can be some competition inside certain categories, and Brian can talk about that in looking, and I can certainly talk about it in listening, but not across categories. But I think it's really important to understand from a framework perspective that there isn't any competition between ships and trucks, and the same thing is true between, you know, talking satellites and listening satellites. And so I think from a competitive landscape, that's a pretty powerful framework for investors to understand. And when they look at a company, first understand where is that company playing. If you're talking about data analytics companies, if you are a parts provider, then you have to ask yourself who's going to buy that part. But if we talk about data analytics companies, which I think is a far more interesting and scalable business model, having that understanding and knowing where there is competition, where there is not, I think is a pretty helpful framework for investors to think about.
We've driven launch costs down to the point where it's really below the reasonable cost of capital in this sector. And what matters is reliability. What matters is getting to certain orbits. And those things are basically far more important in the boardrooms that we're sitting in and making decisions about launch than cost these days. And they're a lot more important than some cutting edge new technology. I care about rockets that go to the right places at the right time. I encourage you, as you think about these companies, to think about them increasingly as infrastructure businesses whose value is defined more and more in software.